And scientists ask me this, we talk about this all the time. Sometimes being in such severe lack and desperation, creates a state where you can't hear anything because no new information can enter the nervous system that is not equal to the emotion the person is experiencing. Just as a broad understanding, this is why we don't do questions at our events, because you can give the person the answer to the question that they're asking you, and they will not hear you. They will not hear you. In fact, they will argue against you. But if you get that person out of that emotional state, and the only person that's going to do that is them, by the way, get that person out of their emotional state, they can hear that information. So sometimes we're programmed into such lack, we're programmed, right, to wait for something out there to change, to take away this emptiness or lack. When this happens, I'll feel this, And so when things are good in our life, we feel good. And when things aren't so good in our life, we feel bad. So we're kind of victimized to the circumstances in our life. Our outer world is controlling our inner world of thoughts and feelings. So if the person has been programmed into saying, why haven't I healed? Or why hasn't this happened in my life? Because the person who's saying, why haven't I healed, is the old self. The new self would never say that, right? The new self is too busy overcoming and becoming, right? So I think people meet information at their own level. But what I can tell you that is so compelling and so exciting is that when we get people on the stage, and it happens every event, it's really quite unbelievable to see a person stand on the stage in front of 2,300 people. You would walk right past her in the grocery store. She doesn't look vegan, she doesn't look ketogenic, she doesn't look particularly fit or young or dressed well, whatever that is. She just looks like a normal person. And they stand on the stage and they tell their story of how they were diagnosed with cancer or whatever the condition is, and what they did in their life to change those health conditions. And there's numerous health conditions. When I look out in the audience and I look at people, there isn't a soul in the audience that isn't leaning in. Everybody is leaning in because there's the example of truth on the stage, and there's nothing like a good story, right? So the change that we're seeing in our community is that there's a greater acceptance, a greater belief, a greater understanding, a greater awareness to the idea that you could actually heal because people witness it. And the person in the audience who's seeing that person who healed themselves from whatever health condition it is relates to them. And they say, my God, if that person can do it, I can do it as well. And just like an infection spreads amongst a culture and creates disease, health and wellness can become as infectious as disease, right? And so it's not uncommon. Like when that person stands on the stage and they're the 4-minute mile. If the person has Raynaud's syndrome, we've had events where 4 other people with Raynaud's syndrome healed at the end of the event, like no longer have any symptoms at all. Or we've had 5 people in one event step out of a wheelchair. Now, if you asked me if I ever thought that was possible, I would say no. So I do think when a person sees that example of truth, their awareness of possibility begins to change. And the evidence then allows the person to increase their own belief in themselves and in possibility. I think it's really one of the fundamental things that keep us alive. I mean, forgiveness to me is just overcoming the emotion. That's it. And like if you overcome the emotion, the side effect of that is that your heart will open. That's exactly what happens. And when energy moves into the heart, we start releasing different chemicals than when we feel angry or when we feel victimized or when we feel sexual. It's just a different chemical elixir, and oxytocin is released. And oxytocin signals nitric oxide. And nitric oxide signals another chemical that causes the arteries in your heart to literally dilate. The heart gets filled with energy. It's engorged with blood. And when that occurs, the oxytocin levels that you're feeling, the love that you're feeling, the studies show that when oxytocin levels are just elevated a little bit, it's really hard to hold a grudge. You just can't, right? So if you're willing to forgive and you overcome the emotion, you'll take your attention off the person or the problem, right? Because the stronger the emotion we have, the more we pay attention to our problems or the person, right? Overcome the emotion, you no longer have your attention on that person. And in a sense, you're taking energy and you're calling it back to you, right? So you're building your own field. And so love is the elixir that allows us to forgive. In other words, you can't say, I'm going to forgive you. It's January 31st or February 1st. Remember this day. We got a thing. I forgave you. That's not like forgiveness. When people really have that feeling of pure love, where they've actually gotten over the emotion, they've already forgiven. They're like, I'm totally cool. I'm great. You great. I'm great. Like, so it's a side effect of a change, because if the stronger the emotion we feel, the more we pay attention to that person. Where we place our attention is where we place our energy. Okay? Overcome the emotion, you no longer have your attention on that person. You're calling energy back to you, and you're building your own field. And there's energy now to heal. There's energy now to create. There's energy now for the mystical experience. And so you can't do that if you're feeling frustrated, or if you're feeling anger, if you're feeling resentment. You'll always hold the grudge. You have to convert. You have to teach a person how to get into that elevated state. And the side effect of that is forgiveness. It's not something that you have to do. It's just something that automatically happens. Yeah, I think so. Because you free yourself. The only way you're going to free yourself from that person or from that past experience is for you to literally overcome the emotion. So, God, we've all had people do really horrible things, and we've probably done some horrible things to people as well. But I don't think you can free yourself or free them unless you decide that, love is going to be the thing that heals it. And God, so many people do it in our work, and the side effect of it is that they have wonderful effects in their lives, many times just healing. There's a definite connection between your brain and heart. Yeah. So we were so fascinated. This was February of 2020. I'll never forget it. We started when we were doing our electroencephalograms, our brain studies. We put a cardiac lead from the heart to the machine, and we started looking at HRV in comparison to brain waves. And coherence is rhythm, right? So when waves are kind of moving in rhythm like this, you can see that on the brain scan, right? They're very orderly. They're they're rhythmic like that. So if you think of waves that are coherent, being very orderly and being very rhythmic, when they're out of order, like choppy, and they're on different parts of the brain or on different rhythms, that's when the brain's incoherent, right? And so when we started looking at training people how to broaden their awareness to sense space, when you're sensing space, the act of sensing and feeling causes you to stop analyzing and thinking. And if you're not analyzing and thinking, you start suppressing neocortical activity. Your brainwaves start to slow down. In beta, you're aware that you're a body local in space and time. That's low-level beta. Like we're talking right now, we're in low-level beta. If I said, Stephen, I'm going to give you a quiz, and you're going to have to take the quiz in front of your audience, and you would kind of perk up a little bit. Your brain would get a little bit more aroused, and the light bulb would get a little brighter, and you'd move into mid-range beta. That's like when you're going to give a speech, or you're at a dinner and you don't know people. You kind of be a little bit more aware.
Just for people that can't see this, because they might be listening on audio.
So beta is conscious awareness. Now, in beta, the brain is trying to create meaning between what's going on in the outer world and what's going on in the inner world, and it's processing all the sensory information. So a lot of data. So beta is like conscious and awake. And so there's low-level beta, there's mid-range beta. It's not on this chart. But high-level beta is when you're fearful, when you're anxious, when you're angry, when you're in pain, when you're frustrated, when you're jealous, whatever. People get switched on in these high levels of beta, and that's when we get over-focused. You ever been under stress and you start over-focusing? That's because you're narrowing your focus and you're over-focusing, and that's kind of a brain state. And so when you broaden your awareness and you, instead of narrow your focus on something physical or material, that's what the stress hormones do. But if you broaden your awareness and you sense space, and you this act of sensing causes you to no longer analyze and think, and your brainwaves start to move into alpha. Now, in alpha, which is this brainwave, is a slower brainwave state. That's the creative state of the brain. The brain sees more in pictures, more in images. It's more imaginary, right? In beta, there's a voice talking to you in the back of your head all the time saying, this is right and this is wrong. You got this to do, you got that to do. That's the critic kind of in our brain. When you get beyond beta brainwaves and you move into alpha, you start opening the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Now, we're not just looking for any type of alpha, but we're looking for coherent alpha. So we want all those compartments that were firing in different rhythms and different frequencies, all of a sudden start doing this. So now the whole entire brain starts moving into what's called global coherence. Now, when the brain starts synchronizing like that, what syncs in the brain starts to link in the brain, and the whole brain starts to fire as one neurological network, and that's what our data shows. Now, that's not the end. That's just when you're moving into an imaginary state, and people do this, but a lot of people move into alpha, but it's not coherent. So we're looking for coherent alpha. Now, many of the people that are meditating really well, they can relax their body so well, and they can feel so safe that their body moves into a light rest or a light sleep while they're still awake. So it's relaxed and awake. In that realm, you're in a hypnotic state. You're in theta brainwaves. And in theta now, lights are shut out in the thinking neocortex that plugs us into three-dimensional reality. The identity's gone. The character is gone. There's no activity there. Now the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is wide open to information, and now we're suggestible to information. And now we're in the operating system. We can get in the subconscious mind and rewrite a program. We could rehearse a new script. We can tell a new story. Instead of the story of the past, we can tell the story of our future, and we can program our subconscious mind and our autonomic nervous system to begin to change our biology. Now, go too far past theta and you fall into delta, and now lights are out. You're in a catatonic state and you're unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. And so we kind of do this when we go to bed at night. We go from beta to alpha, theta to delta. And if you're under stress and you're in high beta, you can't sleep. Mm-hmm. And you can't sleep because you're thinking, right? And you can't drop through brainwaves. When you wake up in the morning, you go from delta to theta to alpha to beta, right? So there's two times that the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind opens up. Okay, what does this have to do with brain and heart coherence? Well, in theta, when a person is in that state where their attention is on their heart and energy is in their heart, it's natural for the heart to tell the brain to get creative. It's time to imagine. It's time to fall in love with a future. Now the heart is the creative center, right? It's the part of our biology that allows the brain to begin, the frontal lobe to begin to create. So you get the heart and the brain kind of working together. The more relaxed you get in your heart, the more awake you get in the brain, something beautiful happens in the brain. If the person can sustain this and they're in that theta state, theta becomes the carrier wave. And right within the brain, you start to see alpha waves building on theta waves, and then alpha waves in harmonics into beta waves, and harmonics into high beta, and then high beta ultimately into gamma. And now the person is relaxed and very awake because gamma is super consciousness. It is super awareness. So the formula of being relaxed and awake and synchronizing your heart to your brain causes the brain to move into a state of what's called resonance. And resonance is when you have waves on top of waves, harmonics, and the brain starts functioning in a more resonant state. Sometimes even people have delta as the base, carrying theta, and theta carrying alpha, and alpha carrying beta to high beta to gamma, and they're all waves within waves. And as those waves come together, if they're coherent, they interfere and create a bigger wave. And then those waves come together and they interfere and they create bigger waves. And that's exactly how the energy in the brain goes up. So we have brain scans of people whose gamma brain waves are 200, 300, 400 standard deviations outside of normal. I'm going to give you an idea. 3 standard deviations outside of normal is 2% of the population. So they're processing an enormous amount of energy in their brain. And it feels really good, really good. So we practice a lot synchronizing the heart to the brain.